Megacorp's auditors walk in and ask three scenarios. Are credentials being abused right now? Where exactly is our customer personal data sitting in S3? And who changed that IAM policy last Tuesday? Here's the part that trips people up. Those sound like one security problem, but Amazon Web Services answers each one with a completely different service. Stack lessons here. I'll prove that in the next few minutes. By the end of this video, you'll be able to hear a compliance scenario and instantly name the one detective service that answers it. We'll cover 6 services that sound interchangeable, but aren't, and the exact trigger phrase that pins each one to its question. Let's pin down 5 terms you'll hear all the way through this video. GuardDuty is the service that watches your logs for suspicious behavior and raises a finding when something looks like a threat. Macie is different. It reads the actual objects inside S3 to find sensitive data like personal information. CloudTrail records every API call in your account, capturing who did what, when, and from where. Amazon Web Services Config tracks the configuration state of your resources over time and checks them against rules. And Security Hub is the aggregation layer that pulls all of those findings into one dashboard. Everything we've covered so far in this course has been preventive. IAM policies, KMS encryption, security groups, block public access, these all exist to stop bad things from happening in the first place. But this episode is about the other half. Detective controls don't stop anything. They find out what happened, or what's happening right now. GuardDuty detects threats, Macie discovers sensitive data, and CloudTrail records the history. Config, Inspector, and Security Hub round out the set. Prevention locks the doors. Detection tells you when someone rattled the handle. And here's why you can't skip the detective layer. Frameworks like SAA-C02 and GDPR don't just ask whether you tried to prevent a breach. They ask whether you can detect one when it happens, and whether you can prove after the fact exactly what occurred. Prevention alone fails that test. You need the record and the alarms, not just the locks. Let's start with GuardDuty. The Amazon Web Services documentation describes it as a threat detection service that continuously monitors and processes your data sources and logs, using threat intelligence feeds and machine learning to identify suspicious and potentially malicious activity. So the trigger phrase to lock in is simple: threat detection from logs. When a scenario asks about detecting malicious or unauthorized behavior, GuardDuty is your answer. GuardDuty pulls from 3 foundational data sources, and it wires them up automatically the moment you enable it. First, CloudTrail management events, the API level activity in your account. Second, VPC flow logs, which give it network traffic metadata. And third, DNS logs, the domain lookups your instances make. It feeds all 3 into machine learning models and threat intelligence feeds and outcome findings. Here's the part people miss. GuardDuty pulls these streams independently. You do not have to enable flow logs or CloudTrail separately for GuardDuty to see them. Think of GuardDuty like your bank's fraud detection. It doesn't look inside your wallet to see what's there. It watches the pattern of your transactions. A login from an unusual country, a burst of activity at 3 in the morning, a spending pattern that looks like a stolen card. When the behavior breaks from normal, an alert fires. GuardDuty works exactly the same way. It reasons about behavior, not about the contents of your files. Here's what those findings actually look like. Cryptocurrency mining on an EC2 instance. Credential exfiltration from an IAM user. Privilege escalation to administrative permissions. Now look at the 4th line. GuardDuty's extended threat detection, which comes at no extra cost, correlates these signals across time and links them into one attack sequence. Credential theft followed by crypto mining. This isn't hypothetical. In a real campaign starting in November of 2025, Attackers had miners running within about 10 minutes of stealing credentials. Individual events looked innocent. The sequence gave them away. But here's the boundary you have to remember. GuardDuty only detects. It generates a finding. It never fixes anything on its own. If you want automated response, you wire it up yourself. The canonical chain is GuardDuty raises a finding, EventBridge catches it, and Lambda takes the action, like isolating a compromised instance. So when a scenario asks how to automatically respond to a GuardDuty finding, that EventBridge to Lambda pattern is the answer. Now for Macie, and notice how the language shifts. The docs call it a data security service that discovers sensitive data using machine learning and pattern matching. GuardDuty watched behavior. Macie looks at data. The trigger phrase here is find where sensitive data lives. When a question is about locating personal information or other sensitive content, Macie is the answer. So what does Macie actually do? It reads the content inside your S3 objects, and it's the only Amazon Web Services service that opens the files to see what's inside. It ships with managed data identifiers, pre-built models that recognize over 100 sensitive data types out of the box, social security numbers, credit cards, passport numbers, API keys, health information. Its automated discovery samples your buckets in the background and builds a data map showing where the sensitive stuff sits. And on top of that, it flags buckets that are public or improperly shared. For a company doing G2 GDPR data mapping, that map is exactly what Article 30 asks for. This is the single most confused pair on the exam, so let's make it crisp. GuardDuty watches API patterns in your log metadata. It says someone is behaving strangely. It never opens your files. Macie reads the actual objects in S3. It says, this bucket holds credit card numbers. One is about behavior, the other is about content. And one more thing about Macie's scope, it is S3 only. It does not scan ABS volumes, RDS databases, or DynamoDB tables. If a question puts sensitive data outside of S3, Macie alone won't cover it. Next is CloudTrail, and the trigger phrase is, who did what a PI call? CloudTrail records every I call in your account, who made it, when, from where, which resource it touched, and whether it succeeded or failed. Those logs land in S3, optionally in CloudWatch logs, and the console keeps a 90-day event history. Now, here's the distinction that matters most. CloudTrail records. It does not detect. Think of it as the building's security camera. It films everyone coming and going, but it never decides who's a threat. GuardDuty is what watches that footage for suspicious behavior. So CloudTrail is your answer when a question is about auditing, proving, or replaying history, the authoritative record that SOC2 and GDPR auditors rely on. CloudTrail splits its logging into two categories, and the docs draw the line clearly. Management events cover operations performed on your resources, the control plane. Data events cover operations performed on or in a resource, the data plane. And notice that last sentence. Data events are often high-volume activities. That volume difference is exactly why the two are treated so differently, which is where we're headed next. Picture it this way. Management events are like recording who enters and exits a building, attaching an IAM policy, launching an instance, creating a VPC. Those are logged by default at no extra cost, and they satisfy most SOC2 and GDPR controls. Data events are like recording every single file someone opened once they were inside. An S3 get object, a put object, a lambda invoke. Those are off by default. They cost extra and they're high volume. So when do you need them? When you have to prove exactly who downloaded a specific file containing personal data. That level of proof requires turning data events on. One more CloudTrail feature auditors love. Log file integrity validation creates cryptographically signed digest files that chain your logs together, so you can prove nothing was altered or deleted after delivery. Pair that with S3 object lock, which we covered back in episode 7, and your audit trail is both tamper-evident and immutable. That combination is what satisfies the strictest write-once requirements in SO2 and PCI. Now, Amazon Web Services Config. The docs put it well. Config provides a detailed view of the configuration of your resources, including how they were configured in the past, so you can see how things change over time. The trigger phrase is my resource compliant? Config is like a DVR for your infrastructure. It lets you rewind and see the exact state of any resource at any moment. Config and CloudTrail are easy to mix up, so here's the clean split. Config answers a question about state. Was this bucket public last Tuesday? It records configuration over time and runs config rules that flag each resource as compliant or non-compliant. You can even deploy conformance packs, bundles of rules aligned to frameworks like CIS and PCI. CloudTrail answers a question about action. Who ran the command that made it public? It records the API call itself with the identity, timestamp, and source IP. So config is the state of the thing. CloudTrail is the action that changed it. Together, they tell the whole story. Security Hub is next, and the docs are explicit about its role. It receives findings from other Amazon Web Services such as GuardDuty, Inspector, and Macie. The trigger phrase is aggregate posture. Notice what that sentence implies. Security Hub does not detect threats itself. It's the layer that pulls everyone else's findings together into a single pane of glass. Here's how the pieces fit. GuardDuty sends its threat findings up to Security Hub. Macie sends its sensitive data findings. Inspector sends its vulnerability findings. And Config feeds in its compliance results. Security Hub takes all of those and normalizes them into one common schema called the Amazon Web Services Security Finding Format, or SFF. The payoff is that everything lands on a single dashboard. Think of it like a hospital's central nursing station. Each monitor beeps for its own reason, but one screen shows them all, prioritized, so nobody has to run room to room. Because they're all in one format, a single event bridge rule can act on any of them. Here's the dependency that catches teams off guard. Security Hub runs most of its compliance controls using config service-linked rules under the hood. So if you turn on Security Hub but forget to enable config, most of those controls just sit there showing insufficient data. Many teams only discover this during their first compliance review. The rule to carry forward: Security Hub requires config to be enabled and recording. That leaves Inspector. The official definition: it's an automated vulnerability management service that continually scans EC2 instances, Lambda functions, and container images for software vulnerabilities. The trigger phrase is vulnerability scan. Where GuardDuty reacts to bad behavior as it happens, Inspector is proactive. It hunts for known weaknesses before anyone exploits them. Inspector covers 3 targets, and knowing all 3 matters. It scans EC2 instances, container images in ECR, and Lambda functions. Here's the clever part with container images. Inspector continuously rescans images already in the registry when new vulnerabilities are published. So an image you pushed months ago can generate a brand new finding today, with no code change at all. And it doesn't just hand you a raw list of vulnerabilities. It produces a contextual risk score that blends the base severity with whether the port is actually exposed and how exploitable the flaw is. The clean mental model: Inspector finds the weaknesses before exploitation, while GuardDuty detects exploitation as it happens. Let's put all 6 side by side, because this mapping is the whole video in one screen. GuardDuty means threat detection from logs. Macie means personal data discovery in S3. CloudTrail means who did what, API call. Config means is my resource compliant. Security Hub means aggregate posture. And inspector means vulnerability scan. On any scenario question, read the requirement, match it to one of these 6 phrases, and the service picks itself. Learn these mappings cold, and this entire domain gets a lot friendlier. Before we test this, let's nail the 3 confusions that cost people the most points. First, GuardDuty versus Macie. Both use machine learning, but GuardDuty reasons about behavior, and Macie reads data content. Second, CloudTrail versus GuardDuty. CloudTrail records the facts. GuardDuty detects the threat. So if a question says detect unauthorized API calls, that's GuardDuty analyzing the logs, not CloudTrail. And third, Security Hub. It aggregates findings, it never detects on its own, and it needs config running underneath it. Keep those 3 straight and you'll clear most of these questions cleanly. Now let's put your knowledge to the test with a quick 5-question quiz. So here's what to carry forward. GuardDuty detects malicious or unauthorized behavior from your logs. Macie finds where sensitive data lives, and only in S3. CloudTrail is the immutable record of who did what, API call. Config tells you whether a resource is compliant over time. Security Hub aggregates every finding into one view, and Inspector scans for known vulnerabilities. And the big picture? These aren't competitors. A large organization runs all 6 and funnels everything into Security Hub for one unified security view. Let's start with question 1. A security team wants to be alerted when an attacker uses compromised IAM credentials to launch crypto mining on EC2 instances. Which service detects this behavioral threat? Is it A, Amazon Macie, B, Amazon GuardDuty, C, Amazon Web Services CloudTrail, or D, Amazon Inspector? Run the trigger phrases before you answer. This one is B, GuardDuty. The keywords are compromised credentials and crypto mining. That's malicious behavior detected from logs. Macie reads data content, CloudTrail only records, and Inspector scans for vulnerabilities rather than active threats. Question 2. To satisfy GDPR, a company must find every S3 bucket that contains EU customer personal data and flag any that are publicly accessible. Which service is designed for this? A, Amazon Web Services Config, B, Amazon GuardDuty, C, Amazon Web Services Security Hub, or D, Amazon Macie. Think about which one actually reads the data. The right call here is D, Macie. The phrase, find where sensitive data lives, points straight at it. Macie reads object content in S3 and flags public buckets. Config checks configuration state, not data content, and GuardDuty watches behavior rather than opening files. Question 3. During the SOC 2 audit, you must produce evidence of exactly who attached a policy to a production IAM role, including the identity, timestamp, and source IP. Which service holds this record? A, Amazon Web Services CloudTrail. B, Amazon GuardDuty. C, Amazon Web Services Security Hub. Or D, Amazon Inspector. Lock in your answer before I give it away. The answer is A, CloudTrail. The phrase, who did what, a PI call, is the tell. Attaching the policy is a management event, logged by default with the caller identity, timestamp, and source IP. GuardDuty would detect a threat, but only CloudTrail is the authoritative audit record. Question 4. A team enables Security Hub across the organization to run CIS benchmark compliance controls, but most controls report insufficient data. What's the most likely cause? A, GuardDuty is not enabled in the member accounts. B, CloudTrail data events are turned off. C, Macie automated discovery has not finished running. Or D, Amazon Web Services Config is not enabled in recording resources. Think about which dependency Security Hub relies on. If you said D, well done. Security Hub runs most of its controls on top of config service linked rules. So without config enabled and recording, those controls have nothing to evaluate and fall back to insufficient data. This is the dependency people forget until their first compliance review. Last one, question 5. GuardDuty raises a critical finding for an EC2 instance. The team wants the instance automatically isolated whenever this happens, with no manual steps. What's the correct pattern? A. Enable GuardDuty auto remediation in the console. B. Have Security Hub isolate the instance directly. C. Route the finding through EventBridge to a Lambda function. Or D. Configure a CloudTrail data event to block the instance. Got your pick? Let's see. If you said C, well done. GuardDuty only detects. It has no auto remediation switch. The canonical chain is GuardDuty raises the finding, EventBridge catches it, and Lambda takes the isolating action. Security Hub aggregates findings, and CloudTrail only records, so neither one performs the response. That's a wrap on threat detection and governance. GuardDuty, Macie, and CloudTrail. Subscribe if you're in for the rest of the Cloud Architect path. It keeps you from having to hunt for each one. The comments are my favorite part, so tell me what clicked and what tripped you up. If there's a cert you want covered next, name it below. And honest notes on the style or pace are always welcome. See you in the next lesson.